This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Where you go, Auburn fans? Welcome to No Huddle, your source for Auburn football news and discussion, part of the E2C Network. I'm AJ Richardson. I'm also here with my buddy Jared Davis. We're about to play the smart team in the conference, I guess you want to call them that. They produce a lot of doctors and just a lot of smart people. Can they outsmart us on the field? We'll talk about it. I have a little bit of trauma from I went up to Vandy in 2012. I think that was when I went, and obviously we all know how the 2012 season went, and Vandy was one of the losses. So I have a little trauma going up to Vandy, but this is not the 2012 season. This is not the 2012 football team at all. And we got a new, breath of life with getting a win last week. I still, one of the things I was looking back at with this game was, the kind of the joke around Vanderbilt and their stadium and renovations. I still don't think it's done, which is pretty hilarious because we are pretty much 2/3 of the way through this season, and it's still kind of a construction zone out there. So we may be playing with do you remember at the very beginning they had their Jumbotron hanging from like two cranes, and I was like, this just feels janky.
I think that's still how they're doing it. I think it was like last week or 2 weeks ago I was watching the game. They're still doing that. Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty weird. I mean, come on, smart people in Vandy, figure it out. Get a better project manager or something. I don't know.
I mean, they probably are more worried about like real life issues at Vandy, and they just didn't realize when the football season started. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, we're like you said, we're doctor. We're trying to cure diseases here. AJ, we're not real worried about football.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to it. Another smart team in the state that you and I live in was able to upset a team. So I don't. We better not take Vanderbilt lightly, because sometimes those smart schools can do things that you don't anticipate. Before we get into that, I did want to have this kind of general conversation, because I did see, and my dad pointed this out to me, and I started doing a little research into it. Auburn now claims 5 national championships. Have you seen or heard about this?
Yeah, I have. I am.
Okay.
I guess because they actually had a BCS, so they had a system. They don't claim 2004, but I was a little surprised, especially after the uncovering of USC and Reggie Bush and players getting paid, and and there was actually, it might have been Golf Digest, but somebody actually did claim Auburn as the champions that year. So that's not one of the years, 2004. But yeah, I say good for them. I mean, listen. Bama has a ton of legitimate championships, but they also have like 5 that are questionable.
Yeah.
I think every school should do this. I think that I'm pretty sure Georgia has several they could claim they don't. Before the playoff era, I mean, even BCS only picked 2. Before the playoff era, I mean, it's kind of up in the air. So
yeah. Well, and it was like there wasn't necessarily always a national championship game.
No, there wasn't at all.
And so it was like, well, these teams have 2 perfect records, and what are you doing to compare? Maybe they have 1 or 2 overlaps, sometimes a little bit more of teams, but like, how do you truly know which one's the best? And especially, in today's age, we've got the beauty of, the championship game, plus now even a playoff. And so you for sure know who's the best team that year. But yeah, I think that's part of the thing that I think Auburn was just like, hey, at least one of the different publishers, like the AP poll or something like that, said Auburn's going to be the national champion, and then maybe another said somebody else. And as long as somebody's claiming it, it seems like Auburn's taking those for at least the 1913 season, the 1983 season, and the 1993 season. So props to them for, I feel like, finally getting around to that. I do think, kind of like you, I'm a little amazed they didn't do the 2004. but maybe that's gonna be with time. Like, I wonder if they're just gonna let that sit a little bit for another 5-10 more years and then claim it, because maybe at some point, I mean, I feel like if there's any season, like that was one of the best seasons I've ever experienced in Auburn football, besides the 2010 season. So pretty amazing stuff there. So now that we got that out of the way, I did want to transition back to Vanderbilt. So their head coach Clark Lee, they've got a sophomore quarterback who played honestly pretty solid for them last season. He's kind of doing all right this season, but he's not helping them win all that much. They're still not doing that great in the SEC. They are 2-7 overall, and the only thing that I think is kind of interesting is sometimes they have some closer games, that even the ones that they've won that were early in the season against Hawaii and then Alabama. Well, no, it was in UNLV where they lost, and you're like, they had some close matchups, but for the most part, they're either getting blown out. The closest one that they really had was against Georgia for a little bit. That was a few weeks ago, but I'm not seeing a whole bunch that necessarily scares me. Is there anything that you're looking at Vanderbilt and thinking, wow, they could come out and shock us? Because it is possible. It's the SEC. I've seen weirder things happen, but anything that you think that the Vanderbilt team does that Auburn may have a problem with?
Yeah, so I literally know nothing about them other than the fact they apparently have a really good receiver.
Yeah.
I'm looking at their schedule, and they get to 20 relatively common. Like Kentucky, they got to 28. Missouri, they got to 21. Georgia, they got to 20. So, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, my fear is, okay, we did look well. We did look good against Mississippi State, but it was at home. We have not looked good on the road in a very long time. This is on the road. Now, I do realize this is not going to be an intimidating environment. There legitimately may be more Auburn fans there than Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Because Nashville's not far away, and it's a cool town, and people will use that as a chance to, have a good weekend. So,
yep.
I think that's going to help us. However, we've struggled to get to 20 on the road. So if Vanderbilt gets there and they have the ability to do that, I will, that does cause a little bit of fear for me. I do trust Vegas. I mean, Vegas has us up by predicted to win by 13. They typically know what they're doing. But you can't go up there and make mistakes. And however, we can't go up there and tell our quarterback he can't make mistakes, because then we're going to play tight again. So
right.
We got to play loose, and I don't think, and I'll end with it, we didn't really talk much about this against Mississippi State in that podcast, but I don't think you can take your foot off the gas in the second half if you have that same situation, because on the road, momentum can flip very quickly. And so you need to make sure the game's out of hand before you go straight conservative, in my opinion.
Right. I mean, I think if Auburn's, up by like 3 touchdowns or more, okay, I give you a little bit of a pass to, pull your foot off the pedal a little bit, burn some clock, be very predictable. But if it's anything closer than that, you just never know. And especially if, Vanderbilt's quarterback and wide receivers start going off. I mean, that's honestly the thing that I'm honestly the most scared about. They're rushing. They're not doing great. They've averaged about 92 yards per game on the ground. That doesn't scare me. Our run defense has been honestly pretty solid this year. And that's been against a lot of really good rushing attacks. So one kind of other funny story that just came to mind. You were talking about the fans, and I still remember for that 2012 season, sure, I'll give them this. It was 11 o'clock game. Students were still waking up, and it was 2 minutes before game time. I got a picture of this. The Vanderbilt student section, which don't think Auburn student section, is literally like a sliver, like 1/8 of the stadium or something, really tiny. And it was like not even a third filled. And you're like, what the heck is going on? It's crazy. So I don't expect that many Vanderbilt fans, especially with this kind of season, to get up, especially the students. Like they're probably studying. Let's be honest, they're nerds, and I love them for being nerds because they're probably going to be my boss at some day. But are you a football fan as much as I am? Probably not. So a little trash talking now.
Yeah, it's the atmosphere. This is the perfect road game to follow up your first confidence builder game at home because you don't want to be going into Baton Rouge after this and lose all momentum that you built at home. So if you go into Vanderbilt and play the exact same way, you're like, okay, maybe we figured something out. That's 2 games in a row, right? If you do that, and then you roll into Arkansas with a lot more confidence, which is a much more difficult place to play. So, I mean, at the end of the day, on paper, we should win this ball game. But we're Auburn fans. We're always nervous about games. And we've only shown to be competent on offense for 1 game. So, while that was very exciting, very promising, we need to do this 2 games.
Yeah,
and I'm a little worried.
100%, because we've seen this season away games have not gone as well for us. Even in some situations, like I would argue, like Cal, it's not that intimidating, but it was early in the season, and you just didn't seem like you could do anything. I get Texas A&M, you got 100,000 fans, roaring down your right over you. Then you got LSU, obviously pretty scary at night. So some of the night games I give Auburn a little bit of a pass, but it just seemed like that wasn't great. I'm not anticipating this by any means. It's a 4 o'clock kickoff at Vanderbilt. I don't necessarily think the environment's going to be the issue. If it's going to be Auburn having issues, it's going to be, I hate to say it, but kind of Auburn beating up itself and whatever happens if we end up having issues on offense.
Well, I think our safety net too is the way Jarquez is running, right? Like if that travels, which typically running does, if that travels, then we're gonna be fine. Like if he's running like he's been running the last 2 games, even if Thorne is not a 90 Pro Football Focus like he was at Mississippi State, we probably should still get out of there with a win. So, I think that's the key. He's getting going. He's hot. Let's keep Jarquez going. Let's don't be super conservative. Let's let Thorne throw it around. And I think that at the end of the day, on paper, we should win the ball game.
Yeah. Literally the only thing, like I said, scaring me is that receiving game potentially going off a little bit because we've had a few issues with teams getting big chunk plays on us, especially if we just kind of sit back and play a little bit soft. And but other than that, all signs are kind of pointing in my mind to Auburn going to Nashville and doing pretty good. So let's talk about our players to watch this game. You've been talking pretty big about Jarquez. Is that going to be your player to watch, or is there even more important guy that you're going to be watching on offense?
Probably going to go Connor Liu because this will be his first road game. True freshman. Again, there won't be a ton of environment to deal with.
And for those who don't know, Connor Liu is our center.
Yes.
I feel like most people probably don't pay attention to that, but he did start, which, again, crazy thing, true freshman, and that's pretty impressive considering Avery Jones, who was our center before. So just want to give a little context.
Well, there. And I don't know this to be true. I'd have to go back and look at the Ole Miss game, but Connor Liu had to come in relatively early in the Ole Miss game. And Jarquez's best 2 games have been Ole Miss and Mississippi State. So I don't know this, but I wonder if that's been a little bit due to Connor Liu. So
could be. Centers, they're trying to set up the blocking, make sure everybody's got their assignments, which if that's done correctly, running backs have holes that they can run through. And I think that comes down to a lot of times kind of the center kind of coordinating that, as well as obviously the quarterback too.
Yep, and I'll end with this. If things go south a little bit on the road, does Connor get nervous? Do we start seeing bad snaps and stuff like that? So it's easy when you're at home. It's easy when everything's working. When it's not working, is there any panic there, or is he truly just an anomaly and he's a true freshman that doesn't get phased and can play center in the SEC?
I mean, considering he's so young, I mean, how many times do you even hear offensive linemen at all at the SEC level that are true freshmen? You just don't hear it because there's such a big jump at the offensive line, size wise, knowledge wise of the game. And it seems like Connor Liu, I think to me, it's just showing how much he has improved in, essentially less than a year of being on campus and doing things for us. So my player to watch on offense, I mean, you got to go with whoever's at quarterback, which it seems like Peyton Thorne's kind of your obvious after last week against Mississippi State, because at this point, we all have our little concerns about Peyton Thorne in away games not doing as well. And if this can be a kind of a, settle him down, give him some, quick plays like they kind of did against Mississippi State, that he can get the momentum going, get us some first downs. We run a little bit more tempo, which you can tell Peyton's pretty darn confident and competent in doing and running a quicker offense. It just seems like he's more comfortable. So all of that combined, I think Peyton Thorne, if he has even, I don't think he's going to have as good of a game as he did against Mississippi State, but if he has anything close to that, I think you're walking out of there with a big win, at least a double-digit win, because Peyton Thorne is just going off. Let's go to defense. Who's your player to watch for this game?
I guess whoever is guarding. Who did you say was their stud receiver?
Will Shepard. Shepard.
Yeah, whoever's guarding Shepard, because I think he's basically their only weapon, but he's a really good one. So whatever DB is on him, I know that's kind of an easy way out, but I think it's legit. Well, I could go pass rush again, but it's not on one person, and we are bad at that. So I'm just going to go with the DB, whoever is covering their number one receiver.
Yeah, it's probably a good bet. I mean, at this point, if you kind of look at what Vanderbilt is doing, I mean, it's like they're just trying to throw a bunch at the wall and just see what happens. I mean, if you thought Auburn's offense was looking pretty bad, I mean, have you watched Vanderbilt's? The closest thing they had was their kind of close-ish game against Georgia, even though Georgia pretty much put it away. They had a little bit more offense there. Besides that, I mean, there's not a whole bunch that Vanderbilt has done, I think, to scare teams, and I think our defense is solid enough. I mean, the kind of position that I keep watching, because we've seen some high weeks for them and some average weeks for them, and sometimes even low, was the linebackers. And when Eugene Asante is out there, it's very evident, like he's the guy. I heard potentially he might have some sort of injury, but he's obviously playing through that and still doing really well. So linebackers kind of in general is who I'll be watching, because, I mean, I just think that there's some consistency that needs to happen at that position to pretty much win any kind of road game. So it'll be the linebackers for me. Special teams. Who are you going to be watching, Jared?
I mean, you made a compelling argument in the last podcast for McPherson and just overall, but so on the field goals, he hasn't missed one yet. Can we continue that? But on his kickoffs, can we get that right? And I may have stolen yours, but you raised a good concern about the out of bounds. I've raised concerns about not always getting it into the end zone. So, at the end of the day, I don't want to say simple things because I couldn't do it, but for college athletes, can we take care of the simple things, I guess, because on the road, all that matters. Everything matters.
Mm-hmm. Every yard matters.
Every yard, every detail matters on the road. I don't care who you're playing. And so, we got to take care of that.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was kind of where my head was at, because I don't think, at least on special teams, are we going to be punting a lot against Vandy? I sure as hope we're not punting 7 times in a game against Vanderbilt or anything like that. If we are, my goodness, I'm going to be standing up, panicking in my living room, watching this game. But the other one that keeps coming to mind is some sort of punt return. Watching either Coy Moore or I think Keontae Scott kind of got back in at least a little bit of punt coverage and punt returns. So to me, that's got to be it. I mean, I don't think we're going to have that many kickoffs because I don't think Vanderbilt's going to be scoring. So we're not going to get a lot of kickoff returns. So yeah, I'm going to go with whoever's the punt returner, which right now is either Coy Moore or Keontae Scott. All right, let's get to our score predictions and then round it out with an Auburn fan perspective of the SEC. Let's talk about score predictions and what we had preseason. I had us by 17 points winning. Jared, you had us winning by 20 points preseason. And I was looking at the ESPN score predictor because I feel like that's we look at it preseason and what it is now. Auburn went from having a 66% chance of beating Vandy to now an 84% chance of beating Vandy. Obviously, opportunity, we've talked about it, for Vandy to come out and shock us. But what's kind of your prediction? What are you thinking this game, how it's going to play out for Auburn?
It's funny. Everything's pointing more in our direction from ESPN and Vegas. I'm going to lower my score spread, though. I'm going to probably go with Vegas. I'm going to say 13 points. I want to be super optimistic and say 20, but I got to see us do what we did last Saturday again and on the road. So, but 13's nice. If that happens, I mean, I'll take a 1-point win, but you go on the road, and win by 13. I don't care who it is. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So I learned my lesson from last week. Go listen to the podcast and you'll figure it out if you haven't already.
You sticking with your gut?
I'm going to stick with my gut. 17-point win for Auburn.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure at least one other score prediction I had was exactly on it preseason, and I changed it week of, being a dummy that I am sometimes, feeling the emotions of the game or whatever. And so I'm going to stick with 17 points. I think we can do it. I mean, 17 points seems very reachable for Auburn. We can, if we have a pretty good run game going, which, you're seeing Jarquez cooking, your passing game, all the different wide receivers, tight ends, even some of the running backs getting some pass. There's a lot of good things that are kind of going. If we can get anything like that, I mean, I think you could see like a score of like 36 to 20, and I'd be completely fine with that. 36-19, you get a 17-point win, something crazy like that. And if you come out of playing Vandy, that's going to feed into the upcoming weeks where Auburn's going to Arkansas, and you got to think, that builds because you just established, hey, we're doing well. We finally got a good road win. Let's go off to Arkansas, and who knows? You got a much better shot there.
AJ, you have to think, right? This is kind of a quasi bowl eligible game, right? Like if we win this game, I mean, you could lose to New Mexico State, but if you win this game on the road, you're probably not losing to New Mexico State at home. So the point being, go win this one, and then all you got to do is beat New Mexico State, and you're going bowling.
Absolutely. And at this point, I mean, the teams talked about it, the coaches have talked about it. That's what their goal is. And so you got to think they're zeroing in on this one. Obviously, it's the game right in front of you. But, I mean, if you win this one, you carry a lot more momentum into the following. And then, I mean, you kind of got, 7 wins pretty not necessarily for sure, but you're carrying a lot more into having a chance of having 7 wins this season, which preseason, if most Auburn fans, including myself, were thinking 7-5, 8-4, and that would have been a pretty respectable first year for Hugh Freeze. So
I will go on record. We are either going 6-6 or 8-4 because if we we're not going 7. If we beat Vandy, Arkansas, and New Mexico State, we're beating Alabama.
Yeah, I feel that too. I mean, any competent Auburn team that seems to be kind of rolling, and we're playing them in Jordan Hare. I mean, even some of the best Alabama teams, they get scared in Jordan Hare. Some craziest things have ever happened in Jordan Hare, and you got to think more will happen.
So 6-6 or 8-4. That's it, AJ. There's no 7-5.
I love it. Any other kind of final thoughts about the Vanderbilt game before we move on to an Auburn fan perspective of the SEC?
No. Well, I mean, just to recap real quick, there's a few games even with our depleted roster, there are a few games on the schedule where we are clearly the better roster. And that wasn't even really the case at Mississippi State. We weren't clearly. This is a game where we are clearly the better roster. And so it is ours for the taking. Go take it. Don't make mistakes, and let's get back home with a victory.
Right. You got to think that they're going into this with a mindset of just go business trip, knock it out, and come back home with that W. Plus, also, what's his face? I'm just blanking on his name. Lineman that came from Vanderbilt.
Oh, yeah. I'm blanking on his name as well. But, yes, we do have a lineman from – McAllister?
Yes, McAllister, Elijah. Yeah. Thank you. So you got him coming back to Vanderbilt where he spent a good bit of his college career. So that'll be kind of interesting to see. I don't know if that'll motivate him anymore, but yeah, he's going back. Let's woo. Sorry about that.
You all right there? Vanderbilt's got you all choked up.
I got all choked up, man, about Vanderbilt.
You're still thinking you're still thinking about that beautiful pass to Javarius.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
That would have to be the most beautiful thing I've seen in weeks, it feels like.
Yep.
Minus my wife.
Very good save there, sir.
That was a close one. Too close. Let's talk about an Auburn fan perspective of the SEC. This is where we put on orange and blue sunglasses and look around the SEC, what's going on, see some trends, what's going on with other teams and how that relates to Auburn. So let's start out with Texas A&M. They beat South Carolina. Texas A&M's kind of slowed down. They're now 5-3. South Carolina not having a great season now, 2-6. Pretty expected there. I'm still obviously not the biggest fan of. We've talked about it plenty of times, but Texas A&M and where they're at. But hey, you gotta win, and so they keep moving forward. Another one that just living in the state of Georgia right now. Georgia is out of having Brock Bowers. He's out probably. I mean, I don't think they've officially said. Maybe I'm wrong. Fans correct me. But it sounds like he's probably out for most of the season, if not all of it, because he had to have a surgery. And Carson Beck, their quarterback at Georgia, is doing pretty darn well. Somebody pointed out statistically Carson Beck is playing better than Stetson Bennett did, at least through this point in the season. If you look back at what Stetson Bennett did last year against Georgia, leading them to a national championship. But the biggest question in my mind, and I asked a few of Georgia fans, I was like, are y'all worried about Brock Bowers not being there? And I kind of got a unanimous answer for most of them. They were like, if Brock Bowers is our key player, then we're screwed. But they had a lot of confidence that other guys would kind of step up. And they did. I mean, Georgia won 43-20 against Florida. And that's kind of, to me, that's a pretty good, statement by Georgia. And kind of they're kind of on the home stretch now. They've only got, in my mind, they do have Missouri, which Missouri can score a lot. But besides that, they got Ole Miss, and they got them at home, and then you got Tennessee. So you got 3 pretty important games coming up for them. If they can get through those unscathed, or even potentially even having a loss, I don't think it's going to necessarily hurt them that bad if they have one loss. They're probably going to the playoffs. And Jared, I'm already trying to prepare myself for anybody else in the state of Georgia. They're coming out, and just get ready for the obnoxious fans, because I feel like they've been, the ones I've interacted with have been a little subdued this year, because Georgia hasn't necessarily lived up to every single expectation that everybody's put on them.
Yeah, I'm kind of numb to it at this point. I'm just like, oh, well, whatever happens, happens. I did speak to, I have a Georgia buddy that I, text throughout the week, and he actually listened to our show, the Ole Miss game, I think. So shout out to him on that, but for the first time. He said he was not super concerned about Florida because Kirby Smart hates them and has them. He absolutely has them ready for that game every year.
Is that like Gus against Arkansas? Is it like that much hatred?
Yeah, because Kirby played at Georgia, right? And he probably played during the Spurrier years, and Spurrier kind of had their number and was cocky about it. So, yeah, Kirby has them ready for that game. But he said he's definitely worried about the next three. I mean, they have Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Georgia Tech, who is surprising some people with games they shouldn't be involved in, and they're winning.
Yeah.
I don't anticipate Georgia to lose to Georgia Tech. I don't really. Tennessee maybe because it's at Tennessee. That's probably the law. I said earlier in the year they would lose there, and then Tennessee's not the same team they were supposed to be. So I've kind of gone back and forth on that. If they're going to lose one, that's the game I think they lose. I agree with you. It probably doesn't ruin their chances of a playoff unless they.
If they drop two of these next three.
Yeah, two they're out.
You got some big problems.
Well, yeah, and I think that they would beat Alabama in Atlanta, but I don't. LSU, man, if LSU's gotten their defense under control, that's a very potent offense. So if Georgia had to match up against them in Atlanta, that could be their potential second loss. So, anyways, we spent a lot of time on Georgia, but at the end of the day, you did mention Carson Beck. I don't think the thing about Stetson was his numbers, and they were good, right? It was like clutch moments. Like he was. I mean, they shouldn't have bet. That Ohio State game was getting away from them last year. He stayed calm. He was clutch, and kind of that Brady mentality of like, I don't care what the score is. We're going to keep doing this. It's going to work. So yeah, I don't find it totally shocking Carson Beck because Carson Beck is. I think it was a 5-star, right?
Yeah, either a high 4. I think he's a 5. I think you're right.
Yeah. So, he'll have his moments to prove the clutchness. He hasn't had to really yet. He did in the Auburn game, I guess. But yeah, that's my thoughts overall on Georgia.
Yeah. And I think that's, in my mind, kind of the main one here. I mean, you did have Ole Miss who just, completely dominated Vanderbilt 33-7. And so, obviously we know Ole Miss, after playing them, they can put up some points. They can do some things. And then we also had Tennessee, who we've talked a little bit about already, and they barely squeaked out a win over Kentucky. Kentucky, I think for a moment, I was watching that game. In the last quarter, Kentucky had at least one chance, if not two, to take the lead, and just wasn't able to do it. And that would have been a good upset for Kentucky. To win one over on a ranked team like Tennessee. So, I mean, I still kind of hold to the same thing generally about the SEC right now. It feels like they're a little down, but it's a long season, and you're seeing a lot of these teams that are kind of rising to the top still, like Ole Miss, Tennessee, still doing pretty good. And so that's kind of what I'm holding to is there's a lot of movement, but there's still a handful that are still kind of being pretty good in the SEC. So, Jared, any other final thoughts before you get out of here?
No, sir. Just let's go take care of business in Nashville.
Yes, sir. I want to do that. Speaking of, was it? Okay, so I was watching the Kansas. I was just thinking about this. I think 2012 with Jonathan Wallace on that team, because that would be kind of a cool. Let's see. I'm going to do a quick Google search for this. But either way, I wanted to mention Kansas beating Oklahoma because Jonathan Wallace, if y'all remember him, former quarterback turned wide receiver for us, kind of along the same vein of like a Cody Burns. But now he's kind of going up the ranks and was on the Kansas staff. And it's a big win for them over Oklahoma. So cool thing there. And the other one, I already talked about this a little bit, but Georgia Tech, the other smart school, beat UNC, and they were ranked. So you and I were talking about this before the podcast. I mean, to me, why I bring up Georgia Tech, it's, we have Vanderbilt. They're, in my mind, the smart school. Probably shouldn't have won that game. You never know. And so you got to prepare like they can beat you. But the other aspect of it is Georgia Tech. they could give Georgia a little bit of fits. I don't think they necessarily win that game, but you give them a little bit more of a fight than I feel like they've given in a very long time against Georgia. So my hope is something like that happens. So, all right, Jared, any other thoughts before we get out of here?
No, sir. I think we have covered it all.
Cool. Well, if you want to find you, Jared, how could they find you? Not a creepy way. You all know that. On social media.
Actually not on there much at all, but you can find me on Facebook under my name, Jared Davis.
And you can find me on X at AJAY, JAY_. It's always great to be an Auburn Tiger and War Eagle.
War Eagle.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.